Welcome back. With just a few days remaining to avoid a possible government shutdown, the Senate shared a stopgap measure including scaled-back military funding for Ukraine and emergency aid for victims of natural disasters. The bill would provide almost $6.2 billion for Kyiv, well short of the $24 billion the White House has requested. But continued U.S. support for Ukraine is facing resistance from some Republican lawmakers in both the House and the Senate.
They're picking Ukraine over Americans. Look, I know there's problems out there. What Russia has done is wrong. And we can defend that. But we also what is watching happen right here in America right now.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is under intense pressure to block aid to Ukraine, but has previously expressed support for Kyiv. Yovanovitch is the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. She joins us now. Thank you for your time, Ambassador. And given the almost impasse that we're seeing in this level of gridlock in Congress, how important is U.S. funding and aid, and military aid for that matter, to the war in Ukraine?
Continued U.S. funding at the requested levels are absolutely critical for Ukraine, but also for us as well, because this is a matter of our values, helping Ukraine defend itself against a totalitarian aggressor, but it's also a matter of our national security interests, because if Russia prevails in Ukraine, we will have a less prosperous, less peaceful, less democratic, less secure world. And that is not in our interests. If Russia prevails in Ukraine, we will need to, we will be dealing with Russia at some future point, perhaps not at a time of our choosing or to our advantage. So I think it is in our interest that we help Ukraine stop Russia in place, and that requires continued high-level U.S. spending. I realize that we also have domestic priorities, but this is a matter of our national security, not only Ukraine's national security.
Quick follow-up here, because there are a growing number of conservative American voters, especially in rural communities, who are saying, you know, the more aid that we send, particularly weapons, the more at risk we are when it comes to national security. Is that true, that the more we send as far as weaponry, that means that we are exposing ourselves in terms of national security?
I don't believe so. I think that it's in our interest to be strong and to send clear, strong signals to Russia, perhaps counterintuitively, that feels like maybe it's putting us at greater risk. But I think it puts us at greater risk when we are equivocal, when we wring our hands and say, oh, this could be provocative to Russia. We need to be strong. Putin is a bully. He backs down when we call his bluff, and we've seen that repeatedly over the last almost 2 years now.
Well, you talk about wanting to basically handle this now when it comes to Russian aggression, and new administrations often come into office looking for a reset, if you will. You know, Russia invaded Georgia at the end of former President George W. Bush's second term, and then you had Russia invade Ukraine during the last half of President Barack Obama's presidency, and then Russia was building a bridge to Crimea during former President Donald Trump's term. So one could argue that each administration dropped the ball in some way or another on Russia. Is there a better way to streamline deterrence efforts over the changing administrations?
Well, I think that we need to, and I realize that this is difficult given some of the divisions, not only in Washington but in the country, but we need a truly bipartisan foreign policy. You'll recall that phrase, that politics ends at the water's edge. That's what we need, because we need to have a consensus on what is in our interest, in our national security interest, and we need to follow through on that from administration to administration.
You know, the second GOP presidential debate is tonight, and you talk about needing to have that bipartisanship. All of the candidates say China is our country's biggest foreign adversary. I know you've said that the U.S. has to pay attention to the whole world to deal with China, Russia, and other countries. So how do you make that happen?
I think we need to be consistent. I think we need to be strong. And I think that the path, I don't disagree that China is the greater adversary, but right now, Russia is the greater threat to Ukraine, to Europe, and to the world in general. And so we need to deal with the Russian threat right now. And I also believe that the road to success in Taiwan and China is through Ukraine. If we don't get Ukraine right, not only will Putin draw lessons from that and try it again, but other dictators around the world will as well. We need to get Ukraine right.
One more question for you before we let you go. I want to think back to that, quote, perfect call between Trump and President Zelensky. You said that you were collateral damage or in the way of former President Trump in his effort to, quote unquote, get dirt on the Bidens. And you also called Trump's former lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, his, quote, personal dirt digger in your book, Lessons from the Edge. Both are facing criminal charges, and a judge has since found Giuliani liable for defamation. So with each passing charge, Ambassador, what runs through your mind?
Well, I think that we live in a great country. We live in a democracy, and we live in a country where the court system works. And so I put my faith not only in the American people, but in the American judicial process.
Marie Yovanovitch, thank you so much for your time and insight. We certainly appreciate it.